Hello, welcome back. Our next lesson is on using the percent equation. And the purpose of this lesson is to understand that a whole is 100%. I think of that as total. And then how to use the percent equation, which is part equals percent times whole. And you're probably wondering, what the heck does that mean? So let's look at the table below to help us identify those terms. Now, I've already highlighted the important information in the word problems for you because remember, that's what good mathematicians do. So let's look at the first word problem. 40% of the students on the field trip love the museum. If there are 20 students on the field trip, how many love the museum? I personally like to identify the whole first because that's easiest for me, and that's going to be the total number of students on the field trip. And we know that right here. So 20 would be our whole. The percent is represented right here, and that represents the percentage of students on the field trip that love the museum. So that's going to be our part, the number of students that love the museum. And we don't know that. So I'm going to use the variable L, because remember in math we use a variable for the unknown. The L for the students that love the museum. Okay, let's look at the next one. 40% of the students on the field trip love the museum. If 20 students love the museum, how many are on the field trip? So for this problem, the whole is missing, the total number of students on the field trip. So I'm going to use the variable W for whole. The percentage of students that love the museum is 40%. And for this one, we do know that number of students that love the museum. That's going to be this 20. Okay, pause the video and try the next one on your own. Okay, let's see how you did. 20 students on the field trip love the museum. If there are 40 students on the field trip, what percent love the museum? So our whole here is the 40 students on the field trip. Our part, we know this one, that's the number of students that love the field trip. So what's missing here is it says what percent. So I'm going to use the variable P for percent. So how'd you do on that one? Did you get that one right? Excellent. All right, let's go to the next page. Now we're going to use the percent equation to actually find the missing pieces. So example 1. In Ty's math class, 20% of students earned an A on the test. If there were 30 students in the class, how many got an A? So for this one, I've already filled the table out for you. Our part is going to be the number of students that earned an A. Our percentage, 20% of the total class earned an A. And our whole or our total was 30 students in the class. So remember the percent equation is part equals percent times whole. We don't know the part, so I'm going to use the variable A for the number of students that earned an A equals 20% of the class, and there's a total of 30 students in the class. So on your calculator, type in 20% times 30, and you should get 6, and that represents the 6 students that earned an A. So how can we make sure we got the correct answer? Remember, with a fraction, the numerator represents a part, so that's the 6 students that earned an A, out of the whole, the total number of students in the class. And if you do 6 divided by 30 on your calculator, you'll get the decimal 2/10. Now that doesn't represent a percent. Remember from our last video, to change a decimal to a percent, you can either multiply by 100, because percentage is out of 100, or you can move the decimal 2 places to the right, tenths, hundredths. So that would be 20%. And look at the table above. That 20% is the percentage of students that earned an A. So we can check that off. We know we did that correctly. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and try this next one on your own. Okay, let's see how you did. A bag of candy contains 30 pieces, of which 28% are red. How many pieces are red? So our whole is the total number of pieces of candy in the bag. That's 300. The percent represents the percent that is red. That's 28%. And our part, there's going to be part of the bag that are red pieces of candy. So I'm going to use the variable R for the red pieces of candy. So R equals 28% of the total bag, 300 pieces of candy. So on your calculator, type in 28% times 300, and you should get 84. So that represents the red pieces of candy. To check our solution, our part, there are 84 red pieces out of 300 pieces of candy. On your calculator, type in 84 divided by 300 and you'll get 28 hundredths. So to change that to a percent, you can either multiply by 100 or move the decimal tenths, hundredths, 2 places to the right, and you'll get 28%. Did you get that one right? Awesome. Okay, our next example is when the whole is missing. So Zoe inflated 24 balloons for the school's dance. If Zoe inflated only 15% of the balloons for the dance, how many balloons are there in total? So notice here our whole is missing, so we want to use the variable W for whole. So our part, we know that she's inflated 24 balloons so far, which represents 15% of the total number of balloons. Now, remember in math, to get the variable by itself, you want to do the opposite operation. So this right here represents multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is division. So we want to divide both sides by that coefficient, the 15%. So on your calculator, do 24 divided by 15%. And you should get for that 160. So that represents 160 total balloons for the dance. So to make sure we did that correctly, she inflated 24 out of the total number of balloons for the dance, 160. Divide that on your calculator, and you'll get 15 hundredths. So to change that to a percent, multiply by 100, or move the decimal tenths, hundredths, and you should get 15%, which that's exactly what we were supposed to get. All right. Let's look at the next one. Go ahead and pause the video and try this next problem on your own. Okay, in a survey, 105 teenagers said surfing was their favorite water sport. If 20% of teenagers said that surfing was their favorite water sport, how many total teenagers were surveyed? So here, the part is the part of teenagers that said surfing was their favorite water sport. That's 105. And that represents 20% of the total number of students. And we don't know that total number of teenagers. So for this one, our part is 105 equals percent times the total number of teenagers. So to get W by itself, we'll divide both sides by 20%. And hopefully you got 525 teenagers. Did you get that? Great. Okay, now let's check to make sure we really did that problem correctly. So our part, there are 105 teenagers that said they like surfing out of a total of 525 teenagers. If you divide that on your calculator, you'll get 2/10. Move the decimal tenths, hundredths, which represents 20% of the total number of teenagers surveyed. So we did that one correctly. Awesome job. Okay, now the last one, this is when the percent is missing. So Haley is making passports for the Night in Paris school dance. So far, she has made 112 passports, and her plan is to make 320 passports. What percent of the passports has Haley produced so far? So here we know she's made 112 out of the total 320 passports. It's our percentage that's missing, so we're going to use a variable P. So part, she's made 112 passports, and this represents the percent of the total number of passports. So to get the percentage, we're going to divide both sides by 320. And for that, when you do that on your calculator, you are going to get the decimal 35 hundredths. So to change that to a percent, move the decimal tenths, hundredths. So the percentage here that's missing is 35%. Okay, so to check our solution here, she has made 112 passports out of 320. Divide that on your calculator. and you do get 35%. All right, our last section in the notes today is using verbal sentences. So these are kind of like word problems, just a little bit shorter. Remember, we've identified some key terms earlier in the year. In math, is means equals, of means to multiply, and anytime it talks about an unknown number, we use a variable. So this first one says, what number is 20% of 110? And remember, the percent equation is part equals percent times whole. So for this one, I'm going to use an n for our unknown. Is means equals. 20% of in math means to multiply 110. So what's missing here is the part. And when you do that on your calculator, you're just going to do 20% times 110, and you should get 22. So what does that 22 really mean? Okay, so remember that represents our part. So 22 out of our whole 110 should be 20%. And if you divide that on your calculator, you'll get 2/10, smooth the decimal, tenths, hundredths, which does represent 20%. All right, let's try the next one. 117 is, remember, is means equals, 45% of what number? So if we're using the percent equation, here it's the whole that's missing. So to get the whole by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 45%, because the opposite of multiplication is division. And when you do that, you should get the whole is 260. So to check our work, part 117 out of the whole, or total, 260 is 45 hundredths on your calculator. Move the decimal, tenths, hundredths, or remember, you can multiply by 100, and that is 45%. So look up here, that's what it was supposed to be. So we know we did that one right. Okay, and the last example. Now this one's tricky because it's written backwards. So you see how the is at the back of the verbal sentence? So just kind of read that as part equals percent times whole. So don't let that trick you. So it says, what percent, we don't know the percent, of 150 is 90. So to get that percent by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 150. Now you're going to get a decimal here, which you should get 6/10. So to change that to a percentage, either multiply by 100 or move the decimal, tenths, hundredths. So our unknown percent is 60%. And then to check our solution, what that means is 90 out of 150 should equal 60%. And if you type that in on your calculator, move the decimal 2 places to the right, and you do get 60%. Okay, that's our last example for this video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.